Bombay, everyone regarded Air India as the airline to use. We supported anything like that because mother was Indian, and Indian things were regarded as being better vibrations. As the plane started to descend into Bombay, all I could see out the window was miles and miles of tin shacks, Dharavi slum. I had no idea people lived this way. We landed and went to get our bags, which were quite a few because we'd packed up everything from London. Somehow, we just couldn't see them. We looked and looked and we waited and waited, probably an hour. I was watching the carousel go round and round, but could see nothing. This was my first experience of being blinded by the ego. The more I became indignant and frustrated, the less things I could feel it in my body, the less things were flowing. Until eventually I reached a point where I kind of let go of everything and just realized I couldn't forcefully make the bags appear. And then at that very moment, they were just there in front of us on the carousel, which we'd been looking at for ages. And they just suddenly, maybe they suddenly appeared. I do not know. But we finally got them and struggled out into the heat of a Bombay day. It had been arranged that we were going to stay with an old yogi in a part of the city called Andheri. His wife had passed away and his son was at college and he now had a spare room. When we finally got through the crowds, he recognized us from descriptions that he'd been given and called us over, and we grabbed our luggage and kind of struggled through carrying a toddler, and he led us to a taxi which we boarded and pushed all the luggage into the back somehow and got to his apartment block and then dragged everything up a few flights of stairs. Our host was one of those people who retains an affection in me because he was such a lovely, kind person and rather humorous. He was renowned for lugging a heavy old reel to reel tape recorder all over Bombay in the heat and bustle to record mother's talks. But he did have a rather stubborn side because there was modern equipment much better suited for the work and much easier to carry around, much smaller and more efficient. But he refused to give up that reel to reel, and he kind of became, I think, became obsolete really. But I imagine that he did record many, many talks that were of immense value to the collective at a time when technology was developing before it had become more advanced. Anyway, uh, it was a lovely stay with him, and although he had a grumpy looking visage, he was really kind and friendly. And talking to him, you found he was a sweet and kindly soul with deep thoughts and deep devotion. He was also a very good cook and fed my son tasty Indian food, who absolutely loved it. I particularly enjoyed the way he put the garlic in without peeling it first, so you could just suck out the garlic from its skin once it was cooked. Mother had also arrived in India and was staying in a house not too far from us, and we received a message to go over and see her. And as we found our way down the street that she was in, a beautiful elephant came swaying towards us, walking along. It was a magical moment, and the first time we'd ever walked past an elephant in the street. The house was full of people coming and going, and we joined the others sitting on the floor before Mother, listening to her address different problems and issues, and laughing and joking and serious, and all the displays of emotion passing over her face. Eventually, she addressed us about our plans, and I said that we were thinking of extending our stay to look around India a bit more, or at least Bombay. My wife was pregnant with our second child at the time, and probably about 6 months along. Mother was tactfully suggestible that for the safety of my wife and unborn child, if anything did go wrong, God forbid, with the pregnancy, it would be better to be in Australia than India because of the level of care available. So we did agree that I would stay on in India and my wife and son would head back to Australia after a few weeks. As it subsequently turned out, my second son came into the world suddenly in the Perth ashram and had the cowl over his head. He breathed in some of the lining of that, and there were complications with his chest, and he had to go into an incubator. And I think his life was saved, all because Mother could see what might happen. And thanks to Mother, he's a grown man, a father with his own children these days. Mother asked me about staying with our host and how it was, and if I was giving him any money towards the food, etc., and suggested I give 3,000 rupees a week. I hadn't thought of it, and I realized, of course, it was the polite and natural thing to be doing. And this was one of those small moments where Mother showed me to be more concerning and more careful and more thoughtful about other people. And I'm grateful for that. Before we had the change in our life of my wife leaving, Mother sent us up to a hill station, and we took a train up and had a wonderful weekend in a beautiful place where it was much cooler. And it was a lovely time with our little family, just in the middle of India, enjoying Indian food and culture. One evening, the yogis were giving a program in a village out of Bombay and had hired a bus. I went along with my son, who was loving everything about India, as much as you can at 2.5 years old. The program had started, and I was right at the back, trying to listen and keep an eye out on my son. And I got distracted, and then somebody came up to me and said, "Your son is walking around the edge of a very large and deep well." And so I had to rush over and get him off, hoping on the way that he was not going to fall in. He was always climbing stuff. and he had no fear of heights. Our little family had loved being in India together, but the days came and I had to take my wife and son to the airport and see them off. There were hugs and kisses, but they were going to a good place, Perth, Western Australia, and my wife's mother was there, and she would give support to my wife at her time of pregnancy. Mother sent me to live with a grandmother who ran a day nursery in her one-room flat, whom she shared with her son, his wife, and their two kids. There was a tiny galley for cooking and a small Indian toilet. I had never before known about using the bathroom Indian style and using water with the left hand to clean, but I found it the most natural way of hygienic and sanitary way that I took to it very naturally, and I have never returned to the Western style and all that paper. There was one single cot in the main room, and the family insisted I sleep upon it. And I refused, but they just would not hear of it. Even though I was like a young man of about 30, they treated me as an honorable guest, the rest of them sleeping on mats on the floor. Mother had suggested to me that I keep a journal in the third person. This process was to help on developing the ability to witness oneself and be emotionally more detached from one's own persona or one's own ego. I began on this path of examining myself and my behavior and my conditionings. And to this day, it has greatly helped me on the inner path of the spirit. Sadly, I see so many people who do not have this ability to self-correct and self-introspect with honesty, which is very valuable. Thus, I spent my time keeping my journal, going for walks around the city, and going to local programs. Although I had stopped using drugs before we left London, I still smoked quite a lot and drank beer up until the time of the flight. And in effect, I was having cravings still and withdrawals, and it made the first month very difficult. And I can remember really craving a cigarette, but I resisted and filled my time up with activity. Luckily, I was quite fit in those days and I could walk and walk for hours. I did one time go over to find a beach and gathered quite a crowd around me. It was regarded as very strange to go in the ocean and try and swim around Bombay at that time, and I was a bit of a novelty. And sometimes I wandered for miles, and the family got a bit concerned about me and worried where I was, but I never felt unsafe. I always felt, it doesn't matter where I go. Mother is always with me, and she's always looking after me. So I spent those a bit of time there, just observing the family I was staying with and the simple people, the kindness and their careful ways, and their, they had to live on small amounts of money, and they had to live looking after each other. They were very collective, lovely people. And I think I learned much more from staying with people who had little than I ever did from people who had a lot. Um, but that's probably subjective, but that's my feeling. Mother had moved to a new apartment over on Nariman Point, Colabar. And the yogi that I was staying with suggested I give her a call and ask whether I could go and see her. That was a really good idea, I thought, at the time. They had the phone number, so they gave it to me. And I was surprised when I rang that I got directly through to Shri Mataji, who answered the phone. And I said, "Oh, Mother, I was wondering if I could come over and visit you." She replied, "Yes, yes, come on, come over." So I went and found a taxi and got over there as quickly as I could. And I was welcomed into the apartment. And I met the yogi who owned the apartment. And there was also an Australian guy there about my age. And I met him for the first time. And there were other people around. There was always people coming and going. And I saw Sri Mataji and, bowed to Mother. And she said, "Welcome, welcome." And, things, people talking, things going on and everything. Later in the day, Sri Mataji spoke to me and said, "Would you like to come and stay here with us?" And I said, "Yes, please, Mother, that's nice." So I got a taxi back to Andheri and got my meager belongings and came directly back and ended up, I think I even had my own room. The apartment was that big. So staying there, we were given food. There were people cooking and cleaning and people coming and going. And, it was a wonderful experience to be in that environment. Unfortunately, I had picked up some negative conditionings from my early days in Sahaj, where people had talked a lot about possessions, boots, negativity, catching, and sometimes it veered into a kind of superstition and made people afraid to sort of engage with anything, which is ridiculous. I mean, we never used to be afraid of anything. And I often worked on people, and, as I mentioned, Mother sent us to TM programs and things like that. We couldn't be afraid of anything if we were to be yogis, if we were to be Mother's representatives. But I had these conditionings that had seeped in and they attached themselves to a kind of hubris. And it wasn't really me, but I got carried away with it a bit. And I realized, in later times that these kind of problems which are outside of us are a good distraction from actually looking at ourselves and seeing that we are the main problem. It's much easier to say that someone else is the problem. That's a common human conditioning, I think. Anyway, one day I had an experience with Mother where it showed up this negativity in me. She was working on a group of people who had arrived in the apartment, and they were quite sick, some of them, and damaged. And we were ostensibly there sort of helping her and everything. I wasn't actually doing anything at that time. She was working on a gentleman who I could see was very heavy, and he had like badders kind of vibrations that were grayish, and And the thought came into my head, oh, I hope I don't have to touch him. I hope I don't have to work on him. Terrible, really, when I think of it. What an unpleasant thought to have about someone who needs help, you know. But that's the kind of things that crept into the ego in those days. And, Sri Mataji, she saw immediately what I had just thought, and she looked straight at me, and she said, "Go, come over here and hold this man's left foot, and grab his foot with your hand and put your other hand out out the window." And at that moment, that just solved everything for me, and I realized what a fool I had been, and how I'd got caught up, and how, yeah, the ego had sort of tried to take me over from my pure spirit, which of course is love. And we are here to be the healers and to help others. And I know that now, and that's just naturally in my being. But at that time, there were many sidetracks with things like that. But, Mother put the laser light of the divine straight on me, and I was just x-rayed and blasted. And so I was just happily doing what she'd just asked me. Within a few seconds, it was bang, it was all over, and I was doing exactly what I should be, was healing and helping. Yeah, that was the way that Mother worked. She'd be sitting there orchestrating everything in the room. There were people giving vibrations, working on other newcomers, giving realization, helping people. And I was there holding the man's foot and putting my hand out the window. And it was just the realization that I was her pure channel working for her. And the vibrations just flowed through me. And all of this man's badders flowed out through me and went out the window because I was the realized one. And I was happy to serve Mother's work. And his vibrations lifted and he became happier. Mother looked across at me and she said, "Okay, is everything all right? Is it all working out?" I said, "Yes, Mother." And that gentleman cleared out all the batters. So I learned surrender to her. There is no such thing as catching. You cannot catch when you are pure love. And that's, of course, what Mother is and was, pure love. Mother suggested that me and the other Australian yogi who was there go off to Elephanta for a day trip. It was just a small island off the coast of Bombay. So we had to go to the gate of India to board a ferry and went off for the day. It was beautiful, out in the ocean, sun was shining, and it was an interesting place. I felt quite some strong vibrations when I was there in certain parts. But the disappointing thing was the state of the ocean around the place, just this black, kind of polluted water. This has become a difficult thing to deal with and witness traveling in India, to see the pollution in the waterways and the rivers, the ocean side. But anyway, we enjoyed the trip, and the difficulty traveling, particularly as foreigners in the country, was the beggars that came at you in hundreds and thousands, banging on your car window and holding up deformed children and things like that. It's very challenging. But we learned from Indian yogis that the thing was to just stay in the center, not react, and not give any response. Because the moment you gave some response, then more and more would be over you. And it was an impossible, you know, tsunami of damaged people that would be, wanting some bakshish. So I found this quite a difficult thing, but had to follow the example of my Indian brothers and sisters who showed us, just look ahead, keep the windows shut, do not respond. If you gave anything, you might as well give everything because it just wouldn't even touch the sides. So it's a very difficult thing. Um, but we returned back and had a great day. And thanks to Mother, we went to I think it was quite an auspicious temple in Elephanta. I don't even know the history of it. I haven't even looked it up. Um, but when Mother sent you somewhere, there was usually some vibration or meaning to it. Sri Mataji was busy as usual with people coming and going, and the former leader of Australia, or the current leader of Australia, arrived and was staying there with us as well now. And one day Mother suggested that would the three of us like to travel with her to attend a wedding in Lucknow. And I think anything that Mother was doing, if you got the chance to go along, you just said yes. You weren't going to say no. And it wasn't her direct relative, but some friends of the family. So luckily I had some decent clothes with me, Western style things. We wore suits, we had. And we all flew to Lucknow. Witnessing a full Hindu wedding ceremony with the fire and costumes was interesting in a way, but I just remember that it didn't really capture my imagination at all. These kind of ceremonies I found to be kind of empty and meaningless, though obviously they meant something to the people performing them. But I had that sense early on of that the only meaning that things had was if they were made in the spirit. And I felt that deeply. You can join a man and a woman together any way you like, but unless they're joined in the spirit, by the spirit, then it doesn't seem to have much meaning. But being with Mother was the main point of everything. We were all staying in a courtyard area with rooms around it. And Mother's room was directly opposite the room the three of us were in. We slept on mats on the floor quite happily. The morning after the wedding, I thought I would go and knock on Mother's door to see if she was there and if she needed anything. But all I found was two Indian men sitting there in chairs, smoking cigarettes and drinking whiskey. My immediate thought was, they shouldn't be doing that in Mother's room, but what could I do as a guest? Something that I learned about India, again, was that the rich, or upper classes, if you like, upper caste, as even though the caste system was supposed to be over, well and truly in action in those days, that they used to inhabit the old British colonial clubs and drink whiskey there. Alcohol was kind of hidden away in society. It wasn't out there as it is today, and everybody can consume it if they wish. It was just for the men in their clubs. Ladies would never have thought of drinking it. Mother had built a big house nearby to us in the shape of a battleship with a large prow for her husband, CP, and took us to see it one evening. She mentions this house in one of her talks, which I found quite a fascinating talk, where she told about how she bought all the materials and bought the big piles of the logs and everything, and got them cheaper, and then was able to sell some on afterwards and make her money back, and also how she looked after the workers and their families and fed them nicely every day. You know, because the workers in India sort of go to the place they're working and set up camp usually if it's a big job. It's not like back in the West where they just go off to work for the day and then go home. They tend to move where the work is. So it was a very beautiful talk, and Mother talked lovely about how she did everything. And people said, "Oh, she can't do this," but she showed that a woman can do anything really well and better than a man. I like that story very, very much. I often had a feeling there's something in me being in India that maybe I was working out some kind of a karma from previous lives. Although I could never really put my finger on it, I had glimpses and I could see in my character traces of that British arrogance and superiority, rather unpleasant to face. But on my father's side, I had that influence from the upper class system and arrogance of England. So it wasn't surprising it was in me. The fact was, I had fallen in love with India on the day that I arrived there. I entertained the notion that I could settle in Bombay. And I really felt I just want to live there. I just loved India. I think my spirit was so happy. My soul was so happy there. And I mentioned this to Mother, and she laughed at me and said, "Well, what are you going to do for work?" And then at that point, of course, the whole thing collapsed. So I sort of I had a fantasy that, you know, being loosely involved in acting and everything, that I might get a job in Bollywood as the token foreigner in the Hindu movies. Yeah, another one of my romantic delusions. But all these things collapsed around me all the time. But the affinity I had with the land of the Holy Mother never diminished, and I've since traveled there many, many times, and probably encompassing years and years, all told, if you put them together. And my soul always feels that joy upon landing on this sacred earth of the Holy Spirit. A full moon music program had been organized in Bombay. It was a special night where the moon was full, and the tradition was that one was to sit out and pass through the night from one day to the next. And they had hired a plot with a stage, and we went along about 10:30 at night. Um, it was, I think, mainly Sahaj yogis, established yogis. There was live music and a stage there for Mother to sit upon, and I was seated next to a guy who was a pilot for Air India, and who spoke very good English. And we chatted away and got on well. And basically, we were waiting and passing time until Shri Mataji arrived. The musicians were playing, and the time did pass, and Mother finally arrived with her brother, Baba Mama, and she sat upon the stage. She didn't give much of a talk, as far as I remember, just welcoming us all and, saying good evening. And she sat there, and Baba Mama began playing with the other musicians. What I heard, he was a wonderful tabla player and a lovely man, and he was just playing away. The music was lifting us playfully, and we were enjoying everything. And then I noticed Shri Mataji staring up at the moon, and all these expressions were crossing her face. She was as if in communication with the moon. She was crossing her brow, she was frowning, raising her eyebrows, widening her eyes, kind of staring hard at the moon and like communicating with the moon. And so I looked up and I could see the moon was being drawn down towards us, drawn down towards the earth, and it came in noticeable movements, like boom, 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 not violent, but just gentle little steps. I looked back at Shri Mataji, and you could see she was just pulling the moon down. She was commanding the moon down to her. It was quite incredible, and very wondrous moment. And eventually, the kind of tension of it all was released, and the moon receded back. Your mother looked back at us, all seated before her, and I looked at the guy next to me, the pilot, and I said, "Did you see that?" And he said, "Yes." We both looked at each other in wonder. The vibrations were wonderful. So the program finished up, and we all got up and mixed and mingled. I was introduced to Baba Mama, and I said to him, well, I loved his music, and if I could do anything half as good as how he played the drums, I'd be a happy man. And he smiled politely and everything. And then, but it was about 3 or 4 in the morning, and we kind of all toddled off home, and we was obviously staying in the same apartment as Shri Mataji, so we ended up going back there. One day, Mother took me with her to visit a family whose father was quite ill and quite old, and he had a hole in his throat, obviously some damage, and he spoke kind of through his throat. I can't remember what that's called. But Mother was in a very playful mood, and she was smiling at me, and I was a bit confused. I thought it was sort of all serious because of this man being, having this problem, this physical problem. But in Mother was just very playful, very joyful. I think we worked on him and gave him vibrations and everything. And then we left. But it was a good example of how the human mind and the divine mind can be miles apart in understanding and conception. And that happened to me on a few occasions. I think it was that day, anyway, after that meeting that family, that we returned to the apartment we were staying in, and there was nobody around. So I was talking to Shri Mataji in the living room, and she began cleaning her jewelry, her gold rings and and bangles, and cleaning them with some cleaning fluid and some cloths and wiping them. And she got to asking me, did I do anything about exercising? And I said, well, actually, I really like doing yoga. You know, I have done yoga in the past, like hatha yoga for the body. Their mother was standing in a few feet in front of me, and she said, "Oh, I'll show you some good exercises to do." And she was facing me. She began showing me that you stood with your feet apart and your arms in the air above your head, and then you leaned over to one side as far as you could, letting one arm hang down and the other hang over the head and hang down, so that you were bending at the waist or the hips, but down to one side. And then she said, you must breathe then, and then do it the other side and breathe. And she said, this is very good for you. And if you do it, you can feel the stretches in the side of your body and in your legs and your back. It does feel very good to do. But you must breathe calmly in and out a few times. And then she showed me another one where you put your hands in your lower back and you bend backwards with your head bent back, looking up at the sky or towards the sky. And that was also one that you had to breathe properly and that you could get much benefit from. But I was just amazed that I had to kind of mentally pinch myself. I'm being instructed in exercise techniques by the Holy Spirit. It's just, you know, these kind of things just become like amazing to consider. Mother then took her rings and set about rubbing them down and putting them back on her fingers carefully. And she said to me, what do you want? And if you remember, she had asked me this question before in Brompton Square in London, and I had replied, to be in your circle, Mother. This time, the answer was again spontaneously. It just came out of me. I didn't know really what to say, but it just came, and I said, Mother, I just want to be that speck of dust. And of course, we both knew I was referring to her poem that she'd written as a child, and I had misquoted it. But she said to me, fully understanding, you are. A large outdoor public program had been organized in Bombay, and we went down. Mother was seated on the stage, and about 10,000 people flooded in eagerly, and everyone sat on the earth. I just joined in the crowd, sitting on the earth, watching and just sucking in vibrations. It was just a beautiful night there. The atmosphere was wonderful. Mother spoke in Hindi and Marathi, and at the end gave the mass realization. And the joy was uplifting and moving. People rushed to the stage to receive darshan and to give flowers and garlands. And it was quite a beautiful thing to see and to witness. Eventually, Mother started slowly making her way out of the place, and I'd somehow managed to get outside, wait for her there, flanking her as she exited, still receiving flowers and blessings, giving blessings. The yogi who we were staying with had brought a car up for Mother to take her back to the apartment, and he backed it up. And Mother got over there and climbed into the car in the front seat next to the yogi. And some other yogis started pulling me, saying, come on, go and get in the car. And I just completely forgotten that I was living with them. I forgot. So I had to, I realized, I better get in. So I got in the back seat, and a huge mound of flowers and garlands were sort of plonked on my lap. It was coming right up to my chin, and so pungent, beautiful smell, especially of jasmine. I love jasmine. And so we drove back to the apartment, and the car had to be parked in the garage, but he let us outside the main entrance. So I went up with Shri Mataji. We entered the lift and I managed to free one hand from my bundle and press the button for the floor we wanted. And the doors closed, and it seemed like we had entered some magical cave. There were mirrors on all sides, wooden paneling below and on the ceiling, brass fittings and railings to hold on to, small lights set in the ceiling that flickered and twinkled and glinted off everything, like muted stars. Everything reflected. Our images were infinitely repeated in the mirrors and went on and on and on all sides of us, mine and Srimataji's, kind of coalesced together. It was like looking into a darkened universe as a capsule traveled through space. I looked back at Shri Mataji before me, and she was playing with her hair, dark as the cosmic night, which fell down upon her shoulders, twirling strands with her fingers. She looked at me, she smiled and said, "Does my hair look all right?" I, barely able to speak, said, "Yes, Mother, it's beautiful." When we arrived at the apartment, I was able to put my bundle of flowers down, and we went into the living room where there was a TV, and Mother turned around and stood before me, and the other yogi joined me, and we stood side by side looking at Sri Mataji, just holding our hands, feeling vibrations. They're just tremendous vibrations pouring over us. And suddenly, as if just by magic, her feet protruded bit by bit from beneath the hem of her sari. And when we saw them, we realized that it was just spontaneous. There was no thinking, but we just dived towards her feet. And we both landed each on one foot and held and stayed there, bowed on the ground, sucking vibrations, until the moment came when the energy to do that retreated, and we stood up. Mother wanted a cup of tea, and she sat down in an armchair, and we sat her upon the floor. Mother really liked an actor called Sam Neill from New Zealand, and she loved watching his movies. And it turned out we had the tape of one of her favorites, so we put it on, and the three of us sat there watching Riley, Ace of Spies.